The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over Cedar Flats as Sarah McKenna shaded her eyes with a calloused hand, watching the dust cloud grow larger on the horizon. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. After 6 months of correspondence, today James Morrison would finally arrive to become her husband and help save the McKenna ranch from foreclosure. "Mama, is that him? Is that our new papa?" 8-year-old Emma tugged at Sarah's faded blue dress, her blonde braids dancing in the desert wind. "I believe so, sweetheart." Sarah smoothed down her best dress, the same one she'd worn to bury her husband Thomas 2 years ago. The black fabric absorbed the heat, making sweat bead along her brow, but it was the only decent thing she owned. Her hands trembled as she checked her hair pinned beneath her worn bonnet. The stagecoach thundered into town, wheels churning up clouds of red dust that coated everything in sight. Sarah's neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had joined several other townspeople near the general store, their curious faces turned toward the approaching vehicle. Cedar Flats rarely saw excitement, and the arrival of Sarah's mail-order husband had become the week's primary gossip. As the stage rolled to a stop with a creak of leather and wood, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete Collins, climbed down and began untying luggage from the roof, but it wasn't James Morrison who emerged from the dusty interior. A tall Apache man stepped down first, his long black hair braided with leather strips and silver ornaments. He wore a mix of traditional and white man's clothing, buckskin pants, a cotton shirt, and a beaded vest that caught the sunlight. His weathered face held the quiet dignity of someone who had seen both worlds and found peace in neither. Behind him came the children. First, an Apache girl of perhaps 12, carrying a baby with distinctly European features, then 2 more Apache children, followed by a freckled, red-haired boy who couldn't have been more than 6. More children emerged, some clearly Apache, others obviously white, and several whose mixed heritage told stories of violence, loss, and survival that Sarah could only imagine. 10 children in total, ranging from the infant to a Apache boy who looked nearly 16. They clustered around the man like lost sheep finding their shepherd, some clinging to his shirt, others standing proudly at his side. The townspeople stared in stunned silence. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale as flour, and Sarah heard someone mutter, "Indians," like it was a curse word. The Apache man's dark eyes scanned the small crowd until they found Sarah. He approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening, aware of how his presence affected the white settlers. "Mrs. McKenna?" His voice carried the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned English as a second language, but his words were clear and educated. "I am Joseph Crow Feather. I believe you have been expecting me." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. I was expecting James Morrison." A sad smile crossed Joseph's weathered features. "James Morrison is what the mission school called me. My birth name is Joseph Crow Feather. I thought it would be easier if I used the name the white teachers gave me in our letters." The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Emma pressed closer to her mother's side, her wide blue eyes taking in the group of children. The baby in the Apache girl's arms began to fuss, and she bounced him gently, whispering soft words in Apache. "This is some kind of mistake." Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice cut through the tension. "Sarah, you can't possibly be considering—" "Ma'am," Joseph interrupted quietly, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "I understand your shock. I should have been honest from the beginning. These children," he gestured to the group behind him, "they have no one else. Some were taken from burning homesteads and raised as Apache. Others are Apache children whose parents died from disease or violence. I have cared for them as my own." Sarah's mind reeled. The carefully written letters, the promises of partnership and marriage, the hope of salvation for her failing ranch, all of it crumbled like sand castles in a flash flood. But looking at the children, she saw something that stopped her from turning away immediately. In their eyes, she recognized the same desperate hope she'd been carrying for months. The oldest boy stepped forward, his mixed heritage evident in his features, Apache cheekbones and dark skin, but green eyes that spoke of a white father. "We will work hard, Mrs. McKenna. We do not come as burden." Before Sarah could respond, Mayor Hutchins pushed through the crowd, his face red with anger and fear. "Now see here, we don't want any trouble in Cedar Flats. You and your children need to move along." Joseph straightened to his full height, and Sarah saw steel in his gentle eyes. "I have done nothing wrong, Mayor. I came here in good faith, as agreed upon in correspondence with Mrs. McKenna." Well, Mrs. McKenna obviously didn't know what she was getting into. Mrs. Henderson snapped. Sarah, tell them they need to leave immediately. All eyes turned to Sarah. Emma's small hand found hers, and she felt her daughter's trust like a weight on her shoulders. The ranch was 3 weeks from foreclosure. She had no other prospects, no other hope. But this was not what she had planned. Joseph seemed to read her thoughts. Mrs. McKenna, I understand if this is not what you expected, but perhaps we could speak privately. These children have traveled many days. They are tired and hungry. Sarah looked at the faces surrounding her, the suspicious townspeople, the hopeful children, the man who had deceived her, yet somehow seemed utterly honest. In that moment, she made a choice that would change everything. Come to the ranch, she said quietly. We'll figure this out. The 2-mile ride to the McKenna ranch passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the soft murmurs of children speaking in Apache. Sarah drove her weathered buckboard while Joseph walked alongside, his hand resting protectively on the wagon's side. The older children took turns walking to make room for the younger ones, their resilience evident in how they adapted without complaint. Emma sat pressed against her mother's side, stealing glances at the Apache girl holding the baby. The girl, who looked to be about 12, had kind eyes and wore a mixture of traditional Apache clothing and a calico dress that had seen better days. As they approached the ranch, Sarah's heart sank at seeing it through a stranger's eyes. The main house needed fresh paint, several fence posts had rotted and fallen, and weeds choked what had once been her vegetable garden. The barn's roof showed gaps where shingles had blown away in the last storm. It was the picture of a failing homestead, exactly what it was. "Mama, are they going to live with us?" Emma whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the oldest boy jogged up beside the wagon. "Mrs. McKenna, we can help fix. I see broken fence, holes in barn roof. We learn to work with wood and tools." Joseph shot the boy a warning look. "David speaks truth, but we do not assume welcome. Mrs. McKenna has right to send us away." Sarah pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and climbed down, her legs shaky from more than just the ride. "Let's get everyone inside. The children need water and food." The house that had felt empty with just Sarah and Emma suddenly seemed impossibly small. 10 additional children filled every corner, their voices creating a symphony of languages: Apache, English, and what sounded like Spanish from one of the younger girls. Joseph remained standing near the door, hat in hand, while his children explored their surroundings with quiet curiosity. "Mrs. McKenna, I owe you explanation, full truth." Sarah busied herself pumping water into a pitcher, needing something to do with her hands. "I think that would be wise, Mr. Crowfeather. Please, just Joseph." He accepted the tin cup she offered and drank deeply before continuing. "I was born Apache, raised in mountains until age 10. Then soldiers came. My family—" He paused, gathering strength. "My family was killed. I was taken to mission school in Santa Fe, given white name, taught white ways. For 8 years they tried to make me forget Apache blood." Emma had quietly begun distributing cups of water to the children, her natural kindness overcoming her shyness. The Apache girl smiled at her and said something in Apache that made Emma giggle. "What does she say?" Emma asked. The girl switched to careful English. "I say you have pretty hair like sunshine." "Her name is Morningstar," Joseph said gently. "She was daughter of my heart brother. Her parents died in winter sickness 2 years ago." Sarah set down the pitcher with shaking hands. "And the others?" "All orphans. Some Apache children whose families died from white man's diseases. Others are white children taken in raids, but raised Apache when no family came to claim them." He gestured to the red-haired boy. "Tommy was found beside burned wagon when he was barely walking. His parents were dead. Apache woman who lost her own son took him as her child." The complexity of their situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. These weren't just homeless children. They were living bridges between 2 worlds that viewed each other as enemies. "Why did you take them all?" Joseph's weathered face softened. "After mission school, I tried to live as white man. Worked for army as translator. Wore white man's clothes, spoke only English. But I could not forget Apache heart. When I see these children, Apache with no family, white children who know only Apache ways, I understand. We are all caught between worlds. None of us fit perfectly in either place." A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Sarah saw 3 riders approaching fast, dust clouds trailing behind them. Her stomach dropped as she recognized Mayor Hutchins, Sheriff Morrison, and Tom Bradley, one of the town's most vocal Indian haters. "Stay inside," Sarah told Joseph, but he was already moving toward the door. "No. If I hide, it shows guilt. I have done nothing wrong." The riders reined in hard, their horses snorting and dancing. Mayor Hutchins remained mounted, using height as intimidation. "Mrs. McKenna, we've come to discuss this situation." "There's nothing to discuss," Sarah replied, stepping onto the porch with Joseph beside her. "These are my guests." Sheriff Morrison, a decent man caught in a difficult position, cleared his throat. "Sarah, folks in town are mighty concerned. Word's spreading that you've got a whole Apache war party camped out here." 10 children and 1 man hardly constitute a war party, Sheriff." Tom Bradley spat tobacco juice near the porch steps. "Apache's an Apache. Don't matter if he's got kids with him. Could be a trick." Inside the house, Sarah could hear the children's voices grow quieter, sensing danger. Morning Star appeared in the doorway, still holding the baby, her young face showing fear she tried to hide. Joseph stepped forward slightly, his movement protective but non-threatening. "I understand your concerns, but these children have done nothing to harm anyone. They need shelter, food, safety. Mrs. McKenna has shown Christian charity." "Christian charity don't extend to harboring heathens," Bradley snarled. "That's enough," Sarah's voice cut like a whip. "This is my land. These children are under my protection." Mayor Hutchins leaned forward in his saddle. "Sarah, be reasonable. Think about Emma. Think about your reputation. No decent woman associates with Indians." "Then I suppose I'm not a decent woman." Sarah felt a strange liberation in the words. "Because I won't turn away hungry children, regardless of their blood." Sheriff Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I respect your Christian feelings, but the town's on edge. There's been Apache raids 50 miles south just last month. People are scared." "These children aren't raiders," Sarah said firmly. "Look at them, Sheriff, really look." Tommy, the red-haired boy, had joined Morning Star in the doorway. His freckled face showed confusion at the adult's tension, but he instinctively moved closer to the Apache girl for protection. The sight of him, clearly white but seeking comfort from Apache family, spoke louder than any argument. Joseph's voice remained calm despite the hostility. "Sheriff, I fought beside cavalry soldiers as translator. I have papers showing my service. These children and I seek only peaceful life." "Papers can be forged," Bradley muttered. Mayor Hutchins held up his hand. "Mrs. McKenna, I'm giving you 1 week to reconsider this foolishness. Send them away or the town will have no choice but to protect itself." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning. From a friend." As the 3 riders galloped away, Sarah felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders like lead. She had just declared war on her own community to protect people she barely knew. Joseph's quiet voice broke the silence. "Mrs. McKenna, you do not need to fight this battle. We can leave." Sarah looked at the children crowded in her doorway, Apache and white, all of them caught between worlds that didn't want them. In their faces, she saw her own isolation, her own struggle to survive in an unforgiving land. "No," she said firmly, "we'll face whatever comes. Together." Dawn broke crisp and clear over the McKenna ranch 3 days later, and Sarah woke to sounds she hadn't heard in years, children's laughter echoing from the barn. Through her bedroom window, she watched Joseph and the older boys working on the collapsed fence posts, their movements efficient and practiced. Morning Star had the younger children organized in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds with the determination of seasoned farmers. Emma burst through the kitchen door as Sarah started breakfast, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Morning Star taught me to braid grass into rope, and David says he can fix the hole in the barn roof if we get some wood planks." "Slow down, sweetheart." Sarah couldn't help but smile at her daughter's enthusiasm. In 3 days, Emma had transformed from a lonely, quiet child into a chattering whirlwind of energy. "And Tommy knows where there's a bee tree. He says we can get honey if we're careful not to make the bees angry." "Can we, Mama? Can we try?" Before Sarah could answer, Joseph appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mrs. McKenna, may I speak with you?" "Of course." "Emma, go help Morning Star with the little ones." Joseph waited until Emma skipped away before entering the kitchen. His presence filled the small space, and Sarah found herself acutely aware of how different her house felt with him in it. More alive somehow, less empty. "The children are settling well," he said, accepting the coffee she offered. "But I must speak honestly about money. I have some saved from my work with Army, but not enough to contribute fairly to household expenses." Sarah's face heated with embarrassment. She'd been so focused on the moral crisis that practical concerns had taken second place. "I should have discussed finances from the beginning. The truth is, Joseph, I'm 3 weeks from losing this place. The bank holds a note for $600 and I don't have it." Joseph set down his coffee cup carefully. $600 is significant sum. My husband took out the loan to buy more cattle. Then the winter killed half the herd, and Thomas died in a riding accident before he could rebuild. I've been trying to hold on ever since, but she gestured helplessly at the run-down ranch around them. In your letters, James Morrison promised to help save ranch. Sarah nodded miserably. I thought a husband could take on the debt, help rebuild the herd. It was foolish maybe, but it seemed like the only choice. Joseph studied her face for a long moment. Perhaps it still is only choice. What do you mean? I mean, perhaps James Morrison still can help save ranch. Sarah stared at him. I don't understand. You wrote to James Morrison. I am James Morrison. Name given by mission school. If you still wish marriage partnership, he paused, choosing words carefully. I have experience with cattle, horses, land management. Children are strong workers. Together, maybe we make ranch profitable again. The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the mantel clock. Through the window, Sarah could see David teaching Emma how to properly hold a hammer, while Tommy and two Apache boys gathered eggs from the henhouse. Joseph, you don't understand what you're suggesting. A white woman married to an Apache man in this territory. She shook her head. It would be dangerous for all of us. More dangerous than losing ranch. Where would you and Emma go? Sarah had no answer. She'd been avoiding that very question for months. Besides, Joseph continued quietly, marriage would be only on paper for legal protection. I would not I would not expect. He struggled with the delicate subject. You mean it would be a business arrangement? Nothing more. Unless, in time, if feelings change. He left the possibility hanging in the air like morning mist. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Sarah saw a lone rider approaching fast, Sheriff Morrison, and he looked grim. Joseph was already moving toward the door when the sheriff reined in his horse. Sarah, Joseph, thank God you're both here. What's wrong? Sarah asked, stepping onto the porch. Apache war party hit the Brennan place last night. Families all dead. Whole countryside's in panic. He paused, looking directly at Joseph. There's talk in town. Some folks think your arrival might have been a signal. Joseph's face went stone still. I have had no contact with Apache bands. These children and I live peaceful life. I believe you, but others don't. Tom Bradley's been drinking and talking loud about taking matters into his own hands. He's got a dozen men worked up and angry. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. What are you saying, Sheriff? I'm saying you need to send Joseph and the children away today, before Bradley and his boys ride out here looking for trouble. No. The word came out stronger than Sarah felt. These children have done nothing wrong. Sarah, be reasonable. This isn't about right and wrong anymore. It's about staying alive. Joseph stepped forward. Sheriff Morrison, I will not bring danger to Mrs. McKenna and her daughter. If my presence puts them at risk, your presence puts you at risk too, the sheriff interrupted. Bradley's talking about a hanging. The words hit like physical blows. Sarah looked at the children playing in her yard, saw Morning Star helping little Tommy reach eggs in the henhouse, watched David patiently teaching Emma carpentry skills her own father had never had time to show her. How long do we have? She asked quietly. Bradley was still drinking when I left town an hour ago, but he'll sober up, and when he does, he'll gather his men. My guess is they'll ride out here this afternoon. Joseph was already moving. I will gather children. We can be gone in 1 hour. Wait. Sarah caught his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the cotton shirt. Where will you go? What will you do? We have survived before, we will survive again. But looking at the children, some too young to understand the danger, others old enough to be frightened, Sarah saw the truth. They had found safety here, had begun to believe in the possibility of a real home. To send them back into the wilderness would destroy something precious that had just begun to grow. Sheriff, she said slowly, what if Joseph and I were married? Would that change anything? Both men stared at her. The sheriff recovered first. Sarah, marriage won't change what he is. If anything, it might make things worse for you. But legally, as my husband, he'd have rights to this property. He couldn't be accused of trespassing or squatting. Joseph's dark eyes searched her face. Mrs. McKenna, you do not need to sacrifice yourself for our safety. Maybe I'm not sacrificing anything. Maybe I'm saving something. She looked around at her failing ranch, then back at the children who had brought it to life in just 3 days. Maybe we're saving each other. The sheriff shook his head. You're both crazy. But if you're determined to do this fool thing, you better do it quick. Justice of the Peace Hendricks is in town today. He could marry you legal and proper. Joseph stepped closer to Sarah, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. Are you certain? Once this is done, there is no changing minds without great cost. Sarah thought of Emma's laughter, of the sound of children's voices filling her empty house, of strong hands working to repair what time and hardship had broken. She thought of the loneliness that had been slowly killing her for 2 years, and of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this strange twist of fate could save them all. "I'm certain," she said. "Let's go to town and get married." The ride to Cedar Flats felt like traveling to a battlefield. Sarah sat rigid on the wagon seat, wearing her one good dress, the same black one she'd worn to meet Joseph 3 days ago. Beside her, Joseph had donned his cleanest shirt and brushed his long hair until it gleamed, though he'd left it loose in the Apache tradition, rather than attempting to look more civilized. The children huddled in the wagon bed, sensing the gravity of the moment. Morningstar held the baby close while the older boys flanked the younger ones protectively. Emma pressed against her mother's side, her usual chatter replaced by wide-eyed solemnity. "Mama," she whispered, "are you scared?" Sarah's honest answer would have been terrifying, so she settled for, "Sometimes doing the right thing feels scary, sweetheart." As they entered town, Sarah noticed the unusual number of men gathered outside the saloon despite the early afternoon hour. Tom Bradley stood at their center, his voice carrying across the street, even though she couldn't make out the words. Several men held rifles, and the mood looked ugly even from a distance. Sheriff Morrison intercepted them at the general store. "Justice Hendricks is waiting at the church, but Sarah, I have to warn you, word's already spreading. Half the town thinks you've lost your mind." "And the other half?" Joseph asked quietly. "Thinks you've bewitched her somehow." The sheriff's expression was grim. "Either way, this marriage won't make you popular." They proceeded to the small wooden church at the end of Main Street, its whitewashed walls and simple cross a stark contrast to the tension crackling through the air. Justice of the Peace Hendricks waited on the steps, a thin man in his 60s who'd seen enough frontier justice to know when to ask questions and when to simply do his job. "Mrs. McKenna, Mr. He paused, looking uncertain. "Crow Feather," Joseph supplied, "though my Christian name is James Morrison." "Mr. Morrison, then. You both understand this is a legally binding ceremony?" "We do," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Inside the church, the ceremony proceeded with stark simplicity. No flowers, no music, no celebration, just legal words spoken in the presence of Sheriff Morrison and the children. When Hendricks asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Do you, Sarah Elizabeth McKenna, take this man as your lawful wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part?" Sarah looked into Joseph's dark eyes and saw strength, kindness, and a deep sadness that matched her own. "I do." "Do you, James Morrison Crow Feather, take this woman as your lawful wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part?" "I do." Joseph's voice carried the weight of a solemn vow. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The moment hung suspended between them. This was supposed to be ceremonial, businesslike, but something deeper passed between them as Joseph gently took Sarah's hands. His kiss was soft, respectful, yet filled with promise, not of passion, but of partnership and protection. Emma clapped her hands, breaking the spell, and the other children smiled despite their nervousness. For just a moment it felt like a real wedding, a real beginning. That moment shattered when angry voices erupted outside. "They're in there! The Indian lover and her savage husband!" Through the church windows, Sarah could see Tom Bradley and at least 15 men surrounding the building. Several carried ropes, and Bradley himself held a shotgun. Sheriff Morrison swore under his breath. "Stay calm, I'll try to talk them down." "No?" Joseph's voice was quiet but firm. "This is my responsibility now. Sarah is my wife. These children are my family. I will face them." "Joseph, they'll kill you. Maybe. But if I hide behind women's skirts, they will surely kill all of us eventually." Justice Hendricks pressed the marriage certificate into Sarah's hands. "This makes it legal, whatever happens." Joseph knelt before the children, speaking rapidly in Apache to the older ones. David nodded gravely and moved to gather the younger children closer. Joseph then turned to Emma, his new stepdaughter. "Emma, you must help Morningstar take care of little ones. Can you be brave for me?" Emma's chin trembled, but she nodded. "Are you coming back?" "I will try very hard to come back." Sarah caught his arm as he stood. "We go together, as husband and wife." Sarah, no, is too dangerous. More dangerous than letting them think you're some kind of monster, instead of a man protecting his family. She straightened her shoulders. We're married now. We face this together. Joseph studied her face, then nodded slowly. Together. They walked to the church doors side by side. Sheriff Morrison positioned himself between them and the crowd, his hand resting on his gun. Tom Bradley, the sheriff called out. This is a house of God. Take your grievances elsewhere. We got no grievance with God, Bradley shouted back. Just with Indian lovers and the savages they protect. Sarah stepped forward, Joseph slightly behind her but visible. A murmur ran through the crowd at seeing them together. Mr. Bradley, Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the churchyard. I am now Mrs. Joseph Morrison, and this is my husband. These children are my family. If you have issues with my choices, you can discuss them with me directly. Your husband's an Apache. My husband is a man who served alongside cavalry soldiers, who speaks 3 languages, who has cared for 10 orphaned children when no one else would. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. My husband is more Christian than any man here who would threaten children in front of a church. One of Bradley's men shifted uncomfortably. Tom, maybe we should think about this. They are just kids. Kids grow up to be warriors, Bradley snarled, but Sarah sensed uncertainty in some of the other men. Joseph stepped forward then, and the crowd tensed. Mr. Bradley, you speak of protecting your community. I understand this. Apache father protects his children. White father protects his children. All men protect what they love. You threatening us, Indian? No, I am telling you that I love these children, and I love my wife. I will protect them, as any man protects his family. But I seek no fight with you or anyone. Sheriff Morrison raised his voice. Tom, you and your boys need to disperse. This is a legal marriage, performed by proper authority. These folks haven't broken any laws. Laws changing, Bradley muttered, but Sarah heard doubt creeping into his voice. Maybe so, the sheriff replied, but until it does, I enforce the law we have. And right now, you're the ones threatening peaceful citizens. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then little Tommy, the red-haired boy, broke free from the group inside the church and ran to Joseph, wrapping his arms around the Apache man's leg. The sight of the obviously white child clinging to Joseph in trust and love seemed to deflate some of the crowd's anger. Bradley looked around at his men, reading their faces. The bloodlust was cooling, replaced by uncertainty. This ain't over, he finally said. You've made your choice, Sarah McKenna Morrison. Live with the consequences. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah felt Joseph's hand find hers. His fingers were trembling slightly, and she realized how much courage it had taken for him to face down 15 armed men. Well, Mrs. Morrison, Sheriff Morrison said with grim humor, you're officially married. Congratulations. Sarah looked at her new husband, at the children gathering around them with relief and hope, at the small church where she'd just pledged her life to a man she barely knew. Thank you, Sheriff, she said quietly. Now let's go home. As they loaded back into the wagon, Emma tugged at Sarah's skirt. Mama, what's my name now? Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt all day. You're Emma Morrison now, sweetheart. We all are. The ride back to the ranch was different from the tense journey to town. The children chattered softly among themselves, and Joseph's hand rested gently on Sarah's shoulder as she drove. They were still strangers, still facing enormous challenges, but they were no longer alone. They were family now, for better or worse, till death do them part. 6 weeks had passed since the wedding, and the first frost painted the Arizona mountains silver in the early morning light. Sarah stood on her porch, watching Joseph and David repair the last section of fence, while Morning Star supervised the younger children gathering the final vegetables from the garden. The ranch looked transformed, not just repaired but thriving. The sound of approaching hooves made her tense automatically, but she relaxed when she recognized Dr. Henderson riding up the path. Unlike his wife, the doctor had proven himself a decent man, treating the children's minor injuries and illnesses without prejudice. Morning, Sarah, he called, dismounting near the porch. How's that cough of little Maria's? Much better, thanks to your medicine. Sarah gestured toward the barn where the 7-year-old Apache girl was helping Morning Star hang laundry. She's back to chattering nonstop. Dr. Henderson smiled, then grew serious. Sarah, I need to tell you something. There's a federal marshal coming through next week. Tom Bradley's been writing letters to the territorial governor, claiming you're harboring hostile Indians. Sarah's blood chilled. But we've done nothing wrong. Joseph served with the army. These children are all documented. I know that, and you know that. but Bradley's got influential friends in Tucson. The marshal's name is Patterson. Fair man from what I hear, but he'll have to investigate the complaints. Joseph appeared at Sarah's side, having overheard the conversation. Dr. Henderson, what kind of investigation? He'll want to see papers, talk to the children, assess whether they pose any threat to local settlers. The doctor looked uncomfortable. Joseph, some of these kids don't speak much English. If Patterson thinks they're being raised as warriors instead of civilized children, he could take them away, Sarah finished, her worst fear spoken aloud. Possibly. Or worse, he could decide Joseph himself is a threat and order him arrested. That evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Joseph sat at the kitchen table planning their defense. Marriage certificates, Joseph's army service records, and letters from his former commanding officers were spread between them. We need character witnesses, Sarah said, reviewing their meager evidence. People who can testify that the children are being raised properly, that you're not some kind of threat. Joseph's expression was grim. Who in Cedar Flats would speak for Apache man and mixed children? Dr. Henderson, for one. Sheriff Morrison seems fair. Maybe Justice Hendricks. 3 men against word of territorial governor's friend is not much. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. Their marriage might have started as necessity, but genuine affection had grown between them. Joseph, there's something else we could do. Something that would prove beyond doubt that these children are being raised as Americans. What do you mean? School. If all the children were enrolled in proper school, learning to read and write English, following American customs, even Patterson couldn't argue they're being raised as warriors. Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, nearest school is in Cedar Flats, town that wanted to hang me 6 weeks ago. Mrs. Brennan taught school before she married. Her replacement hasn't been found yet. Sarah's idea gained momentum as she spoke. What if we brought the school here, hired a proper teacher, created a classroom in the barn? Cost money we do not have. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch that had become truly prosperous under Joseph's management. Actually, we might. The cattle you bought with your army savings have multiplied faster than expected. The vegetable harvest was bigger than anything I've had in years, and— She paused, pulling a letter from her apron pocket. This came yesterday. Joseph read the letter, his eyes widening. Cattle buyer from Tucson wants to purchase entire herd? At premium prices. Joseph, that sale would not only pay off the bank loan, it would leave us enough to hire a teacher and build a proper schoolhouse. And if Marshal Patterson sees established school with proper teacher, children learning American ways, he'd have to admit they're being raised as citizens, not warriors. The sound of crying from the children's room interrupted them. Joseph rose immediately. He'd become attuned to every sound from his young charges. Through the thin walls, they heard Morningstar's gentle voice comforting one of the younger ones who'd had a nightmare. She would make good teacher herself, Joseph said quietly. Morningstar reads English better than some white children her age. Then we have our assistant teacher. Sarah smiled, feeling hope kindle in her chest. Joseph, this could work. Not just to satisfy the marshal, but to give these children real futures. 3 days later, wagons filled with lumber arrived at the ranch. Word had somehow spread through the neighboring homesteads that the Morrisons were building a school, and to Sarah's amazement, several families offered to help. Not the townspeople of Cedar Flats, they remained hostile, but the scattered ranchers and farmers who had seen the Morrison children's behavior and been impressed by their respectfulness and industry. "Heard you're looking for a teacher," called out Martha Stevens, climbing down from her husband's wagon. "I taught back in Kansas before we came west. If the pay's fair, I'd be interested." By the end of the week, a proper one-room schoolhouse stood beside the barn, complete with desks, a blackboard, and bookshelves. Martha Stevens had moved into the small teachers' quarters they'd built, and 12 children, the 10 Morrison children plus 2 from neighboring ranches, sat in neat rows for their first day of class. Marshal Patterson arrived on a crisp morning in late October, just as Martha Stevens was leading the children in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Sarah watched from the porch as the federal officer dismounted and listened to the clear young voices declaring their loyalty to the United States of America. Patterson was a tall, weathered man in his 50s with keen gray eyes that missed nothing. He spent the morning observing the school, questioning the children and reviewing Joseph's papers. Sarah held her breath as he interviewed each child individually, testing their English and asking about their hopes for the future. "Mrs. Morrison," he said finally, joining Sarah and Joseph on the porch, "I've investigated a lot of Indian situations in my time. This isn't what I expected to find." Sarah's heart hammered. What did you expect, Marshall? Hostile children being raised to hate whites, savage conditions, maybe weapons hidden around the ranch. He gestured toward the schoolhouse where laughter echoed from the afternoon recess. Instead, I find the most well-behaved, educated group of children I've seen in any frontier settlement. Joseph remained tense. And your conclusion, Marshall? My conclusion is that Tom Bradley is an idiot and a bigot. Patterson's blunt words were the last thing Sarah had expected. These children are American citizens being raised with American values. That boy David speaks better English than half the territorial legislators I know. Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully she had to sit down. However, Patterson continued, and Sarah's relief froze, there is one legal issue we need to address. What issue? Joseph asked warily. Adoption papers. Legally, these children exist in a grey area. They need proper documentation showing you and Mrs. Morrison as their legal guardians. Sarah blinked. You mean... I'll be recommending to the territorial court that formal adoption proceedings be initiated for all 10 children. It'll take some paperwork and a court appearance, but it'll give them full legal protection as your family. That evening, as the children played in the yard after supper, Sarah and Joseph sat on the porch swing he'd built the week before. The sound of Emma teaching Tommy a new song mixed with the older children's conversations in Apache and English. Sarah, Joseph said quietly, when I stepped off that stagecoach 6 weeks ago, I thought I was bringing burden to desperate woman. And I thought I was getting a white farmer who would save my ranch and stay out of my way. Sarah smiled, leaning against his solid shoulder. We were both wrong, weren't we? Were we wrong? Ranch is saved. Children are safe. We have real family now. Sarah looked out at their domain, the thriving ranch, the schoolhouse where their children learned and laughed, the garden that had fed them all through the harvest season. Most of all, she looked at the man beside her, who had become not just her husband in name, but her true partner in every way that mattered. No, she said softly, we weren't wrong. We were just thinking too small. Joseph's arm tightened around her as Morningstar's voice rose in an Apache lullaby, joined by Emma's sweet soprano in harmony. David and the older boys discussed plans for expanding the chicken coop, while the little ones chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow I write to cattle buyer, Joseph said, accept his offer for herd. And I'll write to the territorial court about adoption proceedings. And then? Sarah smiled, watching their extraordinary family spread across the ranch yard. And then we keep building something beautiful out of something the world said was impossible. As stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, the Morrison family gathered on the porch for their nightly ritual, stories told in 3 languages, plans made for tomorrow's work, and the quiet contentment of people who had found their place in an often hostile world. They were Apache and white, adopted and biological, brought together by loss and held together by love. They were living proof that family wasn't about blood or tradition, but about choosing to stand together when the world tried to tear you apart. In the years that followed, the Morrison School would educate hundreds of children from across the territory. David would become a successful rancher, Morningstar a teacher, and little Tommy a doctor. Emma would grow up bilingual and bicultural, equally at home in both worlds. But that was still to come. Tonight they were simply a family on a porch, watching stars emerge over the land they'd fought to keep, surrounded by the children they'd chosen to love, secure in the knowledge that they'd built something worth defending. The White Widow had waited for her mail-order groom, and an Apache with 10 kids had stepped off the stagecoach. It wasn't the story either had planned, but it was the story that saved them all.